This message is brought to you by Alliance Bible Church located in Mequon, Wisconsin. Our vision is to captivate generations with the satisfying gospel of Jesus Christ. For more information about Alliance Bible Church or other resources, please check out our website, myabc.church.
Engaged alienation. Paradox? Engaged alienation. It might be the best way to describe how Christians live in Babylon. Christians are exiles. The Apostle Peter addresses a group of churches in what's modern-day Turkey in his first epistle, and talks about the fact that these Christians are exiles, they're sojourners. And it's a great way to think about life in 21st century America. Christians are exiles, we're sojourners. Engaged alienation is a great way to characterize how we go about living life as exiles in Babylon. We are engaged. We don't we're not hermits. We don't build reclusive societies like M. Night Shyamalan's The Village. We don't do that. Why don't we do that? Well, the Bible at no point in time creates the expectation that this is going to be something God calls us to. For example, it's very difficult to love your neighbor the way Jesus calls us to if we're hermits, because the way he defines a neighbor is somebody who believes and behaves differently than you. See the parable of the Good Samaritan. Very difficult to love people who believe and behave differently than you do if you don't know any. It's very difficult to contribute to the common good if we have quarantined ourselves, hermetically sealed ourselves off from the society around us, from Babylon around us. It's very difficult to execute the Great Commission, to make disciples of all nations, if the only people we know are those who believe and behave just like we do. So Christians are engaged in our respective Babylons. We're engaged. At the same time, we're going to be alienated, because at no point in time did Jesus or the New Testament writers ever create the expectation that we will not face opposition for our faith. We know that. There will be opposition, there will be persecution. 11 of the 12 apostles died martyred deaths. That's the expectation. Jesus said, in fact, that there'll be many who don't receive me, and there will be some who worship me. So there will be a sense of alienation as we go about our life engaged in Babylon. The book of Daniel is there to serve as sort of a manual for wise living in Babylon. And keep in mind what Babylon is. Babylon is anything that makes wickedness look normal and righteousness look strange. Babylon is anything that makes wickedness look normal and righteousness look strange. And so we can see that. We can see strands of that within our own geopolitical nation of the United States. Some of you you've got work cultures that make wickedness look normal and righteousness look strange. Some of you attend schools where that's the case. And so the book of Daniel is here to offer us some wisdom. How do we do this? How do we do engaged alienation in Babylon? We're going to be looking today at Daniel 6. So if you got a Bible, you got a smartphone, tablet, whatever you got with you, get it open. I want you to have the verses in front of you. Daniel 6, and we're looking at what is probably one of the top 5 most famous, well-known stories in all the Bible, Daniel and the lion's den. You thought you knew it. Ha 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 ha. You thought you knew it. How do we do engaged alienation? We're going to look at 4 principles for wise living in our respective Babylons, wherever your Babylon is. Here's 4 principles for wise living as we do engaged alienation in Babylon. Here are the 4, and then we'll work through them. Be never despairing, yet never presuming. Defiantly pray. Don't trust Persia's leaders, and trust the righteousness of Christ. Here we go. Number one, be never despairing, yet never presuming. Now, if you were to glance at the first few verses of chapter 6, you'll realize that chapter 6 begins with a miracle. Chapter 6 begins with a miracle. You know what the miracle is? A squeaky clean politician. That's the miracle. It describes Daniel. Remember, Daniel is a politician. He's working in government. He's an employee of the state. And it piles high and deep his noble qualities, his traits, his competency, his responsibility. It piles it high and deep. So you have the beginning of chapter 6, a miracle, a squeaky clean politician. Now, on the one hand, this is wisdom to show us how wise people conduct themselves in Persia. Yes, the name has changed. We're no longer in Babylon. We're in Persia. Now, has Daniel moved longitudinally or latitudinally? No, he has stayed put. So what's happened? The Medo-Persian Empire has come in and sacked Babylon. Babylon is no more. It's now the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay, so please note my change of vocabulary. It still means the same stuff. Daniel's still in exile. He's still in exile. He has not moved. There's just a new king on the block. There's a new show in town. It's Persia. And Daniel's qualities, his traits, his competencies, all that stuff that he's demonstrating in now Persia gives us some wisdom as to how God's people conduct themselves as exiles in Persia. Now, what he's doing here is nothing new. This is something he has demonstrated throughout his years of service in Babylon, in this place. And it's something that he has lived out faithfully in accordance with what God told his people to do when Babylon came to town. God gave instructions to his people before Jerusalem was ever sacked. He told them, listen, this is going to happen, and when it happens, here's what I want you to know. So he sends the prophet Jeremiah to them to say to them, here's how you're going to conduct yourselves once you're no longer here, but you're there. Here's one of the things Jeremiah said. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Now here it is. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. It sounds like everyday life. It sounds pretty much like everyday life. Doesn't it sound like pretty much everyday life? Right? So you're going to be in exile. You're going to be not in Jerusalem, but you're going to be in Babylon. You're going to be under the thumb of Babylon. You're just going to do life. Okay? You're just going to do life. It also tells me that he's telling them, expect yourselves to be there a while. You're going to be there a while. You're going to be in this condition for a while. So go through everyday life. You're going to be there a while. Do the same stuff you've done. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. Now watch this. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city, interesting, to which I have carried you into exile. That's Babylon. You're going to seek the peace and prosperity of this city in which you're in exile. Pray to the Lord for it. Okay, so you're praying for it. Oh, okay. Because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So Daniel, what is he doing? He's living out Jeremiah 29. He's living it out. By the time Daniel 6 is written, Daniel had been doing this for decades, 60, 70 years maybe. So how do you live wisely in your Persia? You contribute to the common good. You be productive members of society. Let your work and your way of life contribute to its peace and its prosperity. And be sure to be prayer warriors for it. This is wise living in your Persia, whether that be the United States, your place of employment, or your school. But there still is the hidden authority of God behind all that Daniel's doing. Just because Daniel lives this way doesn't guarantee the king's favor. It doesn't guarantee Persia's favor. The Lord endeared, in this case, the heart of Darius to Daniel. And so these verses are calling us to see how gracious God is in granting you favor with your Persian leaders. right, so the wisdom we mine from this is what? It's don't despair while in Persia. Don't despair. Be never despairing. Seek the peace and prosperity of your city, your workplace, your school. Know the Lord is able to channel Persia's favor in your direction. Despair betrays a very tiny view of God and a fundamental distrust in his word. Now, you'll notice if you glance at it, there's a conjunction at the beginning of verse 4, which means as soon as you read about the favor that Daniel has received from the king of Persia, Darius, the favor he's received from him because of his exceptional qualities and skill, as soon as you read about that, there is skullduggery afoot. Verse 4, at this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. You see, you got a squeaky clean politician. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, may King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Why are they up to this? Why is there this conspiracy? Why are these administrators, these satraps, why are all these people out to get Daniel? Well, we could say maybe it's envy. Daniel just got promoted. We've seen that movie before. Happens a lot, doesn't it? Very modern day problem. Maybe it's envy. Or perhaps Daniel was an impediment to a kickback scheme that these folks developed to enrich themselves. Darius was clearly concerned about Persia's financial integrity. So maybe Daniel was trying to do things by the books, and you've got these other government officials that are saying, now, wait a minute, you're going to shut off a revenue stream for us personally if you do that. Well, there's nothing in the text that would suggest we have to choose between the two. Maybe it's both. If so, we see one constant, unchanging reality. I want you to keep this in mind, folks. This is 2,500 years ago. Okay, one constant, unchanging reality. Amid all the flux and upheaval of history, governments are huge repositories of waste, fraud, and corruption. You got it? Nothing's changed. Even, notice, when you have a perceived ally in the king's chair. Just in case we get too comfortable with receiving the king's favor, wisdom comes along to say, look, just because you have a leader who is your friend doesn't mean the larger animal of Persia won't bite you in the posterior. Be never despairing, yet never presuming. Now, those of you who are familiar with Daniel have probably made note already of a parallelism between chapter 3 and chapter 6. In chapter 3, Babylon throws Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace. In chapter 6, Persia throws Daniel into the lion's den. What's the point? What's the wisdom God wants us to receive from this? The names may change, but the story's the same. What do they say? Same song, different verse? This side of heaven, God's people land on the quote-unquote wrong side of Babylon or Persia. That's just the way it is. Now, we might be tempted to think that with a regime change, God's people can breathe a sigh of relief and wipe the sweat off their brows. Well, along comes Daniel to remind us wisdom sees two sides of the same coin at the same time. One side of the coin says God is able to give you favor in Persia, so don't despair. The other side of the coin says new circumstances don't always give you the relief you crave. You may face the same essential troubles. Be never despairing, yet never presuming. Now, those of you who are prone to big emotional swings over changing political seasons need to pay close attention to that. Charles Schulz's very first Peanuts cartoon helpfully illustrates this. Take a look at it. Very first one, in the first box says, well, here comes old Charlie Brown. Notice God's grace in granting him favor. Charlie's right in front of them, and they say, good old Charlie Brown, yes, sir. More favor. Charlie's past them in the third, but he's within earshot. So what do you get? Good old Charlie Brown. And once he's long gone, how I hate him. Yes, there it is. The life of a Christian in Persia. Don't despair. Don't presume. This is how we do engage alienation. Second, defiantly pray. So you've got this edict that was issued. Now let's listen to this. If you're looking at it, verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So he hears that the edict has been issued, and what does he do? The document's been signed. What does he do? He prays. Several ways Daniel could have responded to this edict. Keep in mind, he's not a no-name within the government of Persia. He's an official. He's a high-ranking officer. There's several ways he could have handled that. You and I might have rushed before the king to protest the unfairness of this new law, or gone home in tears to complain to our friends about it. When Daniel hears about the law, what does he do? He continued to do exactly as he had always done. 3 times a day, it was his habit to go to the upper room of his living quarters, to bow down with his face toward Jerusalem and give thanks to God. He kept doing it. He didn't start a revolution or an alternate political campaign. He prayed. He didn't make a scene in public holding up signs while protesting. He prayed. He didn't take to social media to vent his righteous indignation. He prayed. We're watching a masterclass in wisdom. We're watching a masterclass in wisdom. We saw this in chapter 2, didn't we? After Nebuchadnezzar's death sentence was issued to Daniel's friends, Daniel and his friends, Daniel, the one with incredible spiritual taste, what does he do? He finds his friends, and the first thing he does is what? Pray. Let me tell you something, folks. There is something about prayer and wisdom that go together. There's just something about it. There's something about prayer and wisdom that go together, like peanut butter and jelly. It's like one nourishes the other, and the other fuels the one. Notice again the parallel with chapter 3. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not sure about God's circumstantial will, what will happen to them, but they were sure about God's revealed will. You shall have no other gods before. Remember, they refused to bow before the idol that Nebuchadnezzar had constructed. They weren't sure. They were going to do it. They were sure about God's revealed will. Not doing that. We're not going to break the first commandment. But they weren't sure about God's circumstantial will. What will happen to them as a result of it? Same thing is happening with Daniel. He's not sure about God's circumstantial will. What's going to happen to him? But he is sure about God's revealed will. You shall have no other gods before me. Therefore, I'm going to continue to pray, even in the face of this illegality. But make note of something. In both the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel, what idol were they tempted to worship? The answer in both scenarios is their safety. That's the idol they were tempted to worship. It's not the statue Nebuchadnezzar had constructed. It's not ceasing to pray as Daniel had always done. That's not it. The idol they were tempted to worship in both cases was their safety. Was there safety? Now think about that. When we come up against something, we know what God's revealed will is. We're not sure what his circumstantial will is. We face a temptation as we come to this fork in the road. How do we address it? How do we press into it? Oftentimes, what we think the issue is not the issue. We think it's don't bow down to that statue. No, it's not really that. It's something deeper than that. It's, do you realize what will happen to you if you don't? Your life is on the line. And how do we face it? Negotiate it, try to work. At what point do we say, you know what, the first item on the list in order to face this is not that, it's prayer. We have to pray. We have to pray. How else are you going to access the divine resources to be able to face that, to make the hard decision? Oh, the Lord wants to bring us to the end of ourselves, to the end of our capacities, to the place where we realize there's no other place for me to go but on my knees. And so Daniel defiantly doesn't hold up a sign, doesn't protest. He defiantly prays. He prays. That's how you do engaged alienation in Babylon. Third, don't put your trust in Persia's leaders. Pick it up in verse 12. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring, with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve, continually been able to rescue you from the lions? Now, I'm going to stop there because there's an incredible oddity about this section. And the oddity makes a brilliant point. Did you notice in verses 16 to 20, the writer fixes all of our attention on the king? The whole focus in verses 16 to 20 is on the anguish of Darius rather than the trauma of Daniel. This is terrible movie making. If you see a dude get thrown into a den of lions, you want to see what happens next, right? That's not where the camera goes. The camera pans over to Darius in his luxurious palace quarters. The writer keeps us in suspense about Daniel's fate until verse 21. This is very strange. Daniel's the one thrown to the lions, and we only hear about the king and his agonizing night. It was a tough night. That's crazy. Why is this happening? Why is this going on? Well, in verse 12, the writer depicts the king as naive. His own administrators outmaneuvered him into issuing this decree in order to set up Daniel. And so this king's a bit naive. In verse 14, however, we're shown that the king has compassion for Daniel. But at the same time, he's helpless. This depiction of the king is intentional. We're going to get to Daniel and the lions and all that transpired. We're going to get to that. For right now, the writer is trying to make a point. And the point is this: the rulers may not be personally hostile to you, but even if they favor you, you dare not pin your hopes on them, for they can prove as helpless as anyone else. This is the writer's way of preaching Psalm 146:3. It says this: do not put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. The reason the camera is panned over to Darius in his agonizing night is to preach this. You may have geopolitical leaders who are well predisposed to you, but you dare not pin your hopes on them. The king's own words in the last half of verse 16 seem to indicate this very well. It's a desperate prayer or wish. And so the writer's doing some preventative theology. He seems to say to us, you might have rulers or others in high places who are well disposed towards you, but don't rest in them as your ace up your sleeve. For even they, with all their apparent power, can prove as helpless as Samson without hair. Several years ago, the noted British journalist Malcolm Muggeridge was a guest at a breakfast in Washington, D.C. When he had finished his testimony, he made a number of comments about world affairs, all of which were very pessimistic. Very pessimistic. One of the Christians present at the breakfast said to the speaker, Dr. Muggeridge, you have been very pessimistic. Don't you have any reason for optimism? Muggeridge replied, my friend, I could not be more optimistic than I am, because my hope is in Jesus Christ alone. He allowed that remark to settle for a few seconds, and then he added, just think if the apostolic church had pinned its hopes on the Roman Empire. It fell. Take that out further. Just think if the church had pinned its hopes on the Macedonian Empire. It fell. Just think if the church had pinned its hopes on the French Empire. What happened? It fell. Just think if the church had pinned its hopes on the British Empire. What happened? It fell. Don't put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. That's how you do engaged alienation wisely in Babylon. And fourth, we trust the righteousness of Christ. All right, so let's go back to Daniel. Verse 21, Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. And so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Now, who had the more difficult night? Darius or Daniel? Sounds to me like Darius had the more difficult night. Kind of odd, isn't it? Darius has at his disposal every pleasure that the ancient world had to offer, and yet he didn't enjoy a single one of them. Meanwhile, Daniel had nothing except the presence of God with him, and yet he seemed to enjoy a rather quiet night. It's better, folks, to have a close walk with the Lord and be in the den of lions than not have a close walk with the Lord and be in a luxurious palace. Let's dig deeper into this. The lions, it's not as if they had been defanged by the angel. It's not as though the angel had turned these lions into purring tabby cats. After Daniel's release, Darius had the men who set this whole thing up thrown to the lions, and before they reached the floor, we're told the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. So what made the difference in their fate? Why was Daniel spared by the lions while the conspirators were consumed by them? Well, there's a couple of things. We're told that God sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions. And so you say, and you can conclude from that, every day that God has ordained for me is in his hands. The day of your birth, the day of your death, and everything in between has been predetermined by your Maker. You will not go 1 second earlier than what he has determined for you. We take that from it, sure, certainly. But Daniel goes farther and explains to King Darius that the lions were unable to hurt him because he was found innocent in God's sight. The word Daniel uses for innocent is the word righteous. Because he was found righteous in God's sight, he was spared. Now, does Daniel 6 really give us a realistic perspective on persecution and suffering? I mean, some of you have read Fox's Book of Martyrs. Some of you have read that. You're well acquainted with that. I mean, isn't it true that for every Daniel whom God delivers from the lion's den, there have been hundreds of nameless martyrs whom God did not deliver? Isn't that true? It's certainly true. So where was God then? Were these believers less faithful to God or less important to him than Daniel was? Well, to answer those questions, we need to see that Daniel 6 provides something more than simply a model of how God deals with suffering believers or how, like Daniel, we are supposed to stand firm under trials. And this is fascinating. Christians for centuries have been pointing to this story and making these same observations. Daniel 6 is foreshadowing in history the verdict that will be delivered on all believers on the final judgment. Daniel endured the test of the lion's den, emerging safely out on the other side because God judged him and found him righteous. And as a result, the lions, which acted as God's agents of judgment, did not harm him. However, the unbelievers who plotted against Daniel were found unrighteous and crushed by God's judgment. This is a foreshadow of the final judgment. So here's the question. When the scrutinizing gaze of the Most High God locks onto you, what will he see? Righteousness or unrighteousness? What will he see? If the only verse we had in the book of Romans was chapter 3, verse 10, we'd all be in real trouble. It says this, there is no one righteous, not even one. That is Paul's assessment of all of humanity. All of humanity. He has not isolated a subset within humanity. He has clearly laid out Jew and Gentile, that's everybody, is like this. So in the story of Daniel and the lion's den, the characters in the story we ought to identify ourselves with are the conspirators who set him up, not Daniel. And so we need a righteousness that is foreign to us, one we don't inherently have, and one we can't generate on our own. Just a few verses after telling us this in Romans chapter 3, verse 10, just a few verses, here's what Paul writes. He says, the righteousness of God has been made known. Well, this sounds promising. To which the law and prophets testify. That's Daniel is testifying to this. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. Stare at those words for a minute. The righteousness needed to escape God's judgment is not something you earn. It's something received from someone else. Do you see that? This righteousness needed to escape God's judgment is not something earned. It's something received from someone else. Who has it? Who possesses the righteousness we need to escape God's judgment? Answer, Jesus. How do we get it? How do we receive the righteousness of Jesus? Let me ask you this question. Have you ceased to rely on all your own efforts to earn God's love and forgiveness? Have you ceased to rely on all your own efforts to earn God's love and forgiveness? When we renounce all other trusts and believe in Jesus Christ alone for the gift of righteousness, a transaction happens. There's another pastor who explained this through a very simple analogy that was more straightforward than anything I have read or heard before. Picture a sheet of paper. Picture a sheet of paper. It has your name written at the top. Your name written at the top. And underneath it is a list of all the sins you've committed in your life. All of them. Everything we've ever done, said, thought, or felt that has the slightest blemish. It's all on there. Long list? Long list. Thousands of pages. You think a bill in Congress is long? This one's longer. It's longer. It contains all the unkind ways we've gossiped, the lies we've told to protect ourselves, the angry words we snapped at our kids, the jealousy we felt as others have surpassed us, the idolatry on full display through binging on everything. The list would be endless if we considered all the ways we've failed to love and honor God and failed to love our neighbors. Your name at the top, list of all the sins. Lengthy. Jesus has a piece of paper too. He's got his name written at the top, and underneath that are all the sins he committed. Which is what? 0. His paper is blank. At the cross, Jesus exchanged papers with ours. He crossed out our name with our list of sins. He crossed it out and he wrote his name. And he took that paper to the cross where God poured his wrath out on Jesus for us. And in exchange, Jesus put our name at the top of his perfect paper. So now when God looks at us, he sees Christ's sinless record. God sees the righteousness of Christ. Here's my question to you. Which paper are you carrying around? Which paper are you carrying around? Your paper or Jesus' paper? Have you ceased to rely on all your own efforts to earn God's love and forgiveness? When we renounce all other trusts and we believe in Jesus Christ alone for the gift of righteousness, a transaction happens. Jesus takes your paper from you and he hands you his. Now you're going to ask the question, well, what wisdom does that give us for living as exiles in Babylon? It's this. To a great degree, every one of us, this side of heaven, will always be in exile, the exile of death. Nobody gets out of life alive. I'm sorry if this is the first time you're hearing it. Nobody gets out of life alive. We're all under that sentence. Question: what geopolitical leader can get you out of that? Name it. Who? Nobody. You see, the ace up your sleeve is not a political leader. The ace up your sleeve is a cosmic king. He's the one who has the ace up his sleeve. He's going to play it for you one day. And you're going to walk out of your own lion's den without a scratch. Do you have that hope? The righteousness of Christ. Do you have that hope? Let's pray. It's hard, Lord, not to accumulate a resume, a moral resume as we go through this life. It is very difficult for us not to drift into that way of thinking where we start to say to you, look at us, look at what I've done, look at the list of good things, and think that that somehow is going to be the thing that frees us from our lion's den. Lord, I pray that you would break through whatever stubbornness is present in our minds and our hearts that refuses to relinquish that way of thinking. And get us to the place where we realize the only way we escape the exile of death is through a righteousness that is not inherent to us, but it's one that's given us through the life and death of Jesus Christ. I pray for the person here who has yet to connect those dots. God, I can't do that for them. You have to do that. Your Spirit has to sovereignly work to connect those dots. And I pray that you do that even now in this moment. And Lord, for those of us who, after hearing this, have our joy renewed in the fact that you, through your Son, have traded papers with us and we are now dressed in the righteousness of Christ, God, that would just well up in us to the praise of your great name. Give us joy today. Give us joy this week that Jesus is the ace up our sleeve that we will play on the last day. May he be honored. May he be glorified. May he be lifted up. And we ask it all in his name. Amen.